Okay, do any of you guys have friends that are pre-med majors?
I had one that started.
Oh, okay. What class made them quit?
I think biology.
So they quit very early into it. Okay. What's one of like the big readout courses for students that make it past the first couple semesters? A&P, that wasn't the one I was thinking about. Organic chemistry. Organic chemistry. Have any of you guys been to like Boston or another city like that that's developed organically? If the city develops organically, like what does that mean? It just happens over time naturally. And what happens as a result of the organic growth? I was going to say, if you fly in a plane, you go over some cities, you'll notice that some are like all nicely laid out in grids. And then you get to some places and it's like, what's going on? Yeah, this town grew organically. It's a mess, right? You've got train tracks that are coming through, so you've got streets that go and then they just end, and you've got to pick it up on the other side. And when you're trying to drop your kids off to an appointment or something on time, and you're new to the town, you're like, ah! So Google Maps can be very helpful, or MapQuest, or whatever you prefer using. Anyway, I grew up in the south side of Chicago, actually in a suburb of Evergreen Park, and Chicago grew up not so organically. Partially because of the Chicago fire. It destroyed everything, and then they're like, okay, well, let's put things back, and why don't we make a system? And so there are these nice lines, and you can find your way around pretty easily for the most part. Anyway, organic things are things that develop naturally, right? And they're things that can often be very complex. So at the beginning of the semester, I said I'm going to try to make this course develop organically. And on Friday, I said, okay, next week we're going to talk about correlations. And then as I thought about some of the things that we talked about on Friday, and I was writing up the readings, I'm like, ooh, some of the concepts I wasn't intending to address popped up, like replication. Someone had mentioned replication, and I thought, actually that fits in very well with sort of what we're talking about. Why don't we talk about that a little bit more today? So, the reading for Friday and today should be coming up by this evening. I'm nearly finished with it, but it's going off in some different directions. We're going to talk about replication and some problems with that scientists have when going through the scientific method. So we're changing course just a little bit, but I'm not going to require anyone to go out and buy a book. I'm still sticking with that. We're just changing the topics that we're going to cover. So if you're like, darn, why aren't we going to talk about means today? Just hold on until Wednesday, unless something crazy pops up today, and we'll get to it. Okay, so last class we talked about the scientific method. We said that things start with observation. So we're observing the world around us. We see some mountains in the distance and some snow, and it looks like the mountain's face is sliding off. And that's interesting to us. And we might wonder why that is. So we identify a question. Why does it appear that the mountain face is sliding off? Or why is our one friend so good at picking up chicks or dudes or whatever the case may be? And we have this question. And after we identify the question, we try to create an explanation for why this is. So I suggested one explanation for the mountains sliding. Do any of you guys have friends that are like really good at picking up members of their preferred sex? You do?
No, I just thought it was funny that nobody raised their hand.
I have my little brother. He's surprisingly good at it, and I don't get it.
It's so funny that you say that, because is this Friday? I'm not sure. I think it was Friday. But my son, Nathan, he came home and he's like, Dad, I want to write a tutorial. And I'm like, a tutorial on what? He's like, how to get girls to like you. I'm like, wow. And I asked him, like, isn't that kind of hard? He's like, no, man, it's so easy. The hard thing is finding a girl that you want to like you. And I'm like, well done, son. So anyway, he has these explanations that he's come up with in his mind. And I asked him, Like, do you think it has anything to do with like your striking, long, flowing blonde hair and your blue eyes? And he's like, no, anyone can do it. It doesn't matter what you look like. And I was like, whoa. So anyway, he's potentially created some explanations, right? In the scientific process, when we come up with an explanation, we need to figure out some way to create a test of that explanation. And one good way to identify ways to come up with the test, or maybe do some other things, is to review the literature. So let's briefly talk about reviewing the literature and what a literature review is used for. In the link that I'm going to be sending you to in the text, it directs you to a site about writing a literature review, but I don't think that you have to write a literature review to review the literature. So what is a review of the literature? When can you use it? How can you use it? Why is it a good thing to do?
Need more information?
Okay, you can use it if you need more information about some topic, right? What is a literature review, though? Any of you guys conducted one for any of your courses yet?
Looking at different essays, books, or anything written in the field of the question that you're looking in.
Yeah, so looking at different, I'm going to say published sources within some field, or maybe within some subfield, or particular topical area that's relevant to the thing that you're interested in, right? So a common tool that's used in psychology is to use a psychological database. And they have databases for lots of other fields as well. So you can go into a psychological database and type in memory, and thousands and thousands of articles will pop up that are related to memory. So you might need to hone in on exactly what type of memory are you talking about. Are you talking about procedural memory, semantic memory, working memory? And that will narrow things down. But even then you can narrow things down more. But by using a literature review, hopefully you should be able to find all of the sources that are relevant to both the question and the explanation that you're trying to produce. Does that make sense? So you can use it, what did you say earlier?
Find more data.
To find more data or find more information. What else can you use it for? It's funny, a literature review can be very time consuming, but it can pay off very handsomely.
It's already been done.
Yeah, a lot of things have already been done. A lot of the explanations that you come up with are already out there. So by performing a literature review and finding out that those explanations are already out there, what benefit do you gain?
Save a lot of time.
Nothing. No. Yeah, you can save a lot of time, right? So you can look at the explanations that are out there, and not just look at the explanations, but look at the data that are supporting those explanations, and you can critically evaluate that information and say, you know what, this explanation, I don't think it was tested well. The way that people tested this explanation is just bad. I have a better test, right? And if you have a better test, then you have good reason to go on and do those other things. But if your test was one that's already been done before, and other people have done it, why would you waste your time with going through creating the test, running the test, doing all the data analyses, trying to interpret the data or the results that you came up with, and then communicating something that's basically just like, oh yeah, it's been done. Waste of time. So you can save yourself a ton of time by identifying explanations, or maybe your explanation has already been addressed. And it's possible that that explanation didn't pan out, in which case you can, again, save yourself some time by not going and looking more for that explanation. What else can a literature review help you with? So where did I put it after? Put it after create an explanation, right? Suggesting that you could use it to look and see if other people have done any work relating to that explanation. Now the scientific method, as I sort of put it up here, it looks like this 1, 2, 3 step process. You go through this in order, and that's that. But in reality, the scientific method is a bit more organic and flexible. People jump around from place to place. So in what other areas, what other parts of the scientific method could we put a literature review under?
Running your test to see if other people have had similar findings, if you have a slightly tweaked version of their work.
It's funny that you mentioned the running the test, because that's the one area potentially that I wouldn't put a literature review under. I would actually, in thinking about it that way, I would put it underneath interpreting the results. Have other people found similar results using similar tests, right? And if they have found similar results using similar tests, what happens is you increase convergent validity. Oh, that's actually one of the terms I want to cover today, so I'm very happy that we can do it right now. So convergent validity. In the first reading, I defined validity. What's validity?
The reliability of something.
The what?
Isn't it the reliability of something?
No, validity,
Oh, no.
it's not, like, don't be like, oh, because validity and reliability are often confused ideas. But validity is different from reliability. Yeah, you want to take another shot?
The degree to which something represents or does what it's supposed to.
Yeah, so the degree to which something represents what it's supposed to, or the degree to which some tool does what it's supposed to. Yeah. Okay, beautiful. All right, so imagine that we have something that we're interested in. Who has a topic in psychology that's already sort of interested in you?
Neuropsychology?
Neuropsychology, what specifically? Is there some specific thing, Broca's aphasia, or?
Basically just seeing if there's a specific, more or less switch that has a more primal initiator, why people will kill somebody and not feel remorse, and like that kind of stuff, and how it relates physically to psychologically.
Okay, so do you have a brain area that you're thinking about?
Amygdala,
The amygdala. So the amygdala is heavily involved in what?
aggression.
Oh, gosh, I was hoping someone else would answer. You obviously had that idea. No. So it's heavily involved in aggression, also fear. Right? That makes sense. If something pops up, a tiger or a bear or something, and I want to survive, and I don't know that you should really play dead, being afraid is going to activate your sympathetic nervous system, which is going to flood you with adrenaline and other things, elevate your heart rate, increase your breathing, which is going to help you fight things better. Right? So we're afraid, we can fight. Rah! So it might make sense that if the amygdala is activated, then we could be more likely to kill people. So what are some testable hypotheses that we could look at regarding amygdala and, let's say, these more animalistic, primal types of behaviors? So could you make any predictions about differences in amygdalas for people who have committed murder versus those who have not?
Perhaps somebody that previous murder or has murdered people before, maybe their amygdala fires more or is running more often.
Yeah, so maybe people who have committed murder have more active amygdalas, right? So how could you test this? Okay, how? All right, we're going to get a bunch of volunteers. Yes, an fMRI. What does an fMRI do?
It dyes the neurons and shows you, or I don't remember exactly which one's which.
I was going to say the pretty colors that you
Yeah.
see, those are what the scientists have put in afterwards to make it more obvious.
To show which parts of the brain are being activated.
Yeah, so what the fMRI does is it identifies which parts of the brain are more activated relative to some control state. So you might have a situation in which people are just looking at sunsets and puppies, and you're measuring the activity of their amygdala. And then what you do is you show them pictures of violent things or something that should create a fear response or an aggressive type of response. And then you look and see how active the amygdala is. Now, they're not looking directly at the activity because they're not seeing individual neurons firing, but what they're seeing instead are changes in the blood flowing to those regions. So by comparing the blood flow during the aggressive condition to the blood flow during the baseline or neutral condition, you can see which parts of the brain are more activated in that aggressive condition, right? So maybe we got two groups of subjects, one a group of murderers, one a group of non-murderers, and we look and see if their amygdala responds differently. Does that make sense? So we've got a test. It's beautiful. So, I forget what I was saying. Oh, right. In the interpretation of the results. So maybe we do this test and we find this pattern where the amygdala is more highly active in murderers than in non-murderers, and we want to see if there are similar patterns in other published results. So what's another way that we could test the idea that murderers have higher amygdala, or have different amygdalar processing than non-murderers? Let's stay away from fMRI, because we've got one fMRI test already.
Virtual reality,
Okay?
set up some kind of situation where they can make a choice on either killing somebody or not killing somebody.
It's funny that you mentioned this, because I just read something about this on Friday. Yeah, it was on Friday. I was reading about a video game company. I'm not sure which one, but they had talked about offering the players in the video game really sort of ambiguous choices. Do you kill this person or do you not kill this person? And in the example that they gave, it was a zombie game, and the individual is in a situation where they're in the room with an old person who's about to die. So you're faced with the choice. What do you do with this old person? If they die, what's going to happen? They're going to turn into a zombie. And if this is sort of like a 28 days later zombie, the old person is going to be scary because they're going to be moving fast. So I'm guessing it's not one of the original George Romano, right? Because otherwise it's no big deal. Whatever, old man. So, you're faced with the choice. Do you bash this guy's skull in before he dies and kill this man? Or do you let the man die and then try to bash his skull in before he gets you? So this is a choice. It's sort of ambiguous. He hasn't done anything to hurt you yet. And they've actually collected data on the people that are making these choices to kill versus not to kill. So we can look and see, maybe we've got some prisoners. I'm not sure if they're allowed to play Xbox or PlayStation. They are? All right, sweet. So that's good. We've got some murderers locked up, and maybe we want a better control so it's not just murderers versus people who are free on the outside. So we're going to look at another prison population, murderers versus tax evaders.
I don't know.
White collar crime. And so they're bored and they've got nothing to do, so they play this game and we can observe things. And if we're right that the murderers have this drive to be more aggressive, potentially due to their amygdala. In this situation, we're not looking at the amygdala directly, right? We're looking at something that could indirectly support this idea that the amygdala is involved. So what we have here are basically two different types of studies that are both looking at the same broad ideas. They're looking at the same concepts, aggression, and potential reason why that would be. And so by running both of these different types of studies, what will happen, hopefully, is that both of those studies will point to the same answer. In other words, they'll both converge on the same answer. So if you think about when I was talking about, do I love my son, or do I love my daughter? Like any one piece of evidence isn't all that convincing by itself. However, when you look at how often I hug her, or what happens to my face when I see her, or, I don't know, my willingness to take her out and do things with her, or the amount of times that I say I love her, and the amount of times that I yell at her, right? You look at all of those pieces of evidence, and they all sort of converge on this one explanation that I do indeed love her. So when you have multiple methods or multiple studies that are looking at roughly the same questions in slightly different ways, what this is called is converging operations, or converging methods. And these converging methods are used to increase convergent validity. So validity is the extent to which something accurately represents what's going on. And if murderers really are more aggressive, we should see signs of more aggression in multiple ways. We should see them kill more of the old men before they die in that video game. We should see more amygdala activity in that fMRI. So both of those pieces of evidence are going to converge on one thing. Now the interesting thing about doing the literature review here involved in interpreting results is that if you are doing a test to see if amygdala activity is related to violence, you've probably already identified a whole bunch of sources that have suggested those relationships, right? Because maybe you did the literature up here and you found some of those sources. So often the literature, or the part where the literature review is going to be really useful down here is when the results don't turn out the way that you expected. That's bizarre. The murderers actually killed that dude less often. Wonder why. So you might have to go into a literature review to try to explain and interpret your results. Where else is a literature review useful? If you remember last class, I talked about observation and how I sort of conceived of that very broadly. How you might actually be reading something and come up with a question while you're reading it. So maybe you're really interested in neuropsychology, and it's not that you have a particular question in mind, you just are interested in the area, so you start reading neuropsychological journals. Right? And you're doing this review of the literature just because you're interested, and this review might spark questions. And by looking at those questions and doing another review, you can potentially identify explanations that are likely to work or that haven't been proposed yet, or those that have been proposed and have turned out fruitful or fruitless. You can use it in creating a test. How can you use a literature review to create a test?
Looking at good models that might have worked in the past and try and work yours into it.
Yeah, so maybe there are some methods that have already been used very successfully in the past. And if you're not familiar with those, doing a literature review can help you uncover those things. So, trying to think of something else. Does someone else have an interest in psychology?
Well, I was going to keep it on that one, but you could change the test. They've only done amygdala and compare the firing rates of the prefrontal cortex versus moralities that see if one's overriding the other one.
So maybe it's not just the prefrontal cortex, but how do you look at the prefrontal cortex? Like what types of tests do you do to measure prefrontal cortex activity? I mean, so you said that's where the morality's at, but
You could do more Freudian type analysis and just have different, I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. I'm just as an experimental lesson.
You know, I'm here. But just different moral-esque questions, like more or less like there's a train coming and you can divert and you kill 2 adults or you kill a baby. Like those type of different moral questions, and you go and ask non-killing people to killing people. And
Okay.
Another group and it's like see the differences.
So, all right, we can do some of these moral dilemmas. We can, all right, there's a train coming, and it's coming down the middle track, and you have the option to, it's gonna kill either all, 100 passengers inside if you don't pick a track, or it's gonna kill 2 adults or a baby. What do you do? Maybe who the adults are comes into play.
Like your parents or
Yeah, it's your parents.
best friends or something like that.
It's crack baby.
Somehow makes it better.
Does it? I mean, we can test that, right? That's a testable hypothesis. I predict that people would be more willing to kill a crack baby than they would be a healthy baby. You know what crack babies are like?
This is one of the things I never thought we'd talk about.
They're ornery sons of guns. My crack! You seen the Dave Chappelle show?
This is like something out of a dream. Like, you're talking about crack babies and how they're ornery.
So there are different baby temperaments, right? There are the easygoing babies and the difficult babies. And one of the things that can help you make a difficult baby is crack. Or nicotine, or caffeine, stress, mercury, eat a lot of tuna. There are lots of things that can produce babies that are going to have a higher probability of developing a difficult temperament. Anyway, difficult baby is not so much fun. So I would predict that people would be more willing to kill the crack baby than the non-crack baby. Anyway, we can test it, right? But, so, if you think that the prefrontal cortex is involved in morality, we could do some of those types of things, and you might say that this test, where the guy's going to choose whether or not to kill the old man before he's a zombie, is sort of a morality test, right? Because it's a living person who breathes and feels and can experience fear and pain, whereas a zombie is just nothing. No big. So that's already a test of morality. But if the prefrontal cortex is involved, what are some other tests of prefrontal cortex activity or ability? I mentioned a type of memory earlier that's very heavily linked with prefrontal cortex activity. Working memory. Did you just mount that, Tori?
Yeah, I did.
Anyway, working memory. Thank you, sir. Okay, so how do you perform a working memory test? No one knows. This is good. You need to do a literature review. So, working memory is the ability to maintain multiple things in your mind at once and keep them active. So a common memory test is like a repeat after me. 7, 9, 2, 6, 5. Right, and then we can increase the number of numbers that we have and see how big someone's working memory capacity is. So the size of the working memory capacity is 7
Give or take 2.
plus or minus 2. That's right? So 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information. Generally, there are different types of working memory, but that's the general rule. 7 plus or minus 2. So now that we've identified a way to test working memory, we could potentially create a test that we wouldn't have thought of before. So by doing the lit review, not only can we identify explanations that have been examined before and haven't produced anything useful, or ones that have been, but maybe you want to tweak a little bit, it can also tell us how we can go out and test those things. Now once you've got the test there, you just go out and run it. Now I say just, and it's not necessarily a just go out and do it type of thing. It really depends on the type of research that you're interested in. So if you do research on topics like I do, so I'm a cognitive psychologist, and my area of expertise is in visual attention, I do little tests that take an hour for an individual subject to run. I collect 16, 24 data points, and I can be done with my entire experiment in a week. That's it. And I talk with some people in other areas of psychology, maybe personality psychologists. And how many people do they have to get? More or less, do you think? More. Oh my goodness. So some of my friends, they would end up getting sample sizes of hundreds versus my 20. Ha ha ha, sucks to be you. Or if you're a developmental psychologist, maybe you only get a sample size of 20. It's a small sample size. But if you're interested in how people change as they go through developmental milestones, what's going to be the thing that stops it from just go out and do it? Yeah, it's going to take a lot of time. But once you're armed with the test, assuming that you have the time to do it, facilities, potentially the money that you need to pay participants or provide the materials for the participants, once you've got all that stuff, you just go and do it, although that going might take extended periods of time. Then we analyze the data. And I would argue that the lit review can help here too. How?
Can see what other results were, how it compares to yours.
So I would say that's in the results interpretation, because the data analysis, I think of, like we've got the raw data, or maybe not the pure raw data, because lots of times we'll have to do a little bit of pre-processing of that raw data to make it amenable for statistical analysis. So maybe the raw data, we have a survey with a bunch of Likert scale questions. You guys familiar with Likert scales? We have some people that are shaking their heads. Who knows what Likert scale is? Yeah, Allison.
Like, you ask a question, it's like strongly disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree.
Yeah. So, in the past, I have wanted to murder somebody. 0.05. I strongly disagree. No, man, I've never wanted to do that. All up to, I strongly agree. Yes, I have. Right? And we might have a whole number of things looking at aggression, because aggression isn't just a desire to murder. Maybe it's killing a mouse that you found rummaging in your pantry. Right? Oh, here you go, little buddy. Be free. Don't come back in my house. Or, like me, sorry, I'm dropping you in a bucket of bleach. Oh. Right? So we can have a whole bunch of these questions. And we aren't just going to maybe analyze each of the questions individually. Maybe we want to come up with the total score for that. Because the total score is going to have properties that the individual questions don't. And that's more of a stats issue than a methods one. So we aren't going to talk about that much. But anyway, in terms of analyzing data, perhaps you have some data and you're not sure how to analyze them. One of the things that you can do is do a literature review. Maybe you thought, oh, I'm going to use a t-test, but then you remember at the time that you're going to analyze the data that a t-test is not appropriate. What do? You do a literature review, alternatives to the t-test. Maybe for a particular data type. Some of you might know there are different types of data. There's ordinal scale data, ratio scale, interval, nominal scale data. And there are different types of statistical analyses that you're supposed to perform if you have different types of data. So if you're not familiar with the type of statistical test that you're supposed to use, you can do a literature review to find what that statistical test is and also to learn how to do it. So the lit review can come in helpful here as well. We've already talked about it in terms of interpreting results. So finally we get to the communication stage where we're going to present our results maybe as a poster somewhere. If you guys end up finishing your degree here at EOU, you'll all do a poster as part of your capstone project, and you'll be asked to walk people through what you found and what you did. Or maybe you want to write it up for publication in a peer-reviewed journal. And it's useful to have performed a literature review earlier in the phase, but it's also sometimes good to do a literature review at the last stage too. Maybe you make some claim about how you're interpreting the data, and you want to make sure that you don't plagiarize. So you want to see if that claim is already out there. Because just like it doesn't matter if you didn't know that the speed limit was 25 and you're going 40, if you happen to say, oh yeah, and I think this, and that this is already out there in the literature, and you just didn't realize it, you plagiarized. So a lit review can save your butt from potentially plagiarizing. Does that make sense? Are there any of these other things that we could move around? Or maybe jump out of order?
Question, observation?
Question, observation.
You just ask a question and then observe that?
Potentially, so you could just ask a question. Can you think of a question you just asked?
Do old people drive slower?
Do old people drive slower? Now I'd argue that this is actually based on observation, right?
True.
True. So it's possible that you could ask the question first, but I would argue that a lot of the times the question comes from having observed something, like my grandfather driving. Come on, Grandpa. But if you think about it, the observation comes in here. You're observing the literature that's already been published. They're running the test. You're observing the data. You're observing the results in some sense. Any of you guys know what a pilot study is? Oh. A test study, that's right. It's not a study of pilots, it's a test study. So, what would you do a test study for? Why wouldn't you just do a study in full force your very first time? So let's think about the aggression questionnaire. So I'm asking people, in the past, I want, indicate how much you agree with these statements. In the past, I've thought about murdering people. What was my next one? The next question?
The mouse statement?
Yeah, the mouse.
Yeah, would you kill the mouse around?
Oh yeah, would you kill a mouse that you found rummaging in your pantry? Do you enjoy watching MMA? Multiple martial arts, is that right?
Mixed.
Mixed martial arts, because there are multiple ones that mix together. Anything else? Give me other questions that could go on the survey.
Have you ever kicked a dog before?
Have you ever kicked a dog? Great.
Enjoy fighting.
Do you enjoy fighting?
Have you ever had a little black book of people that you didn't like?
So I'm an old school football fan. I haven't watched football in years, but I remember when Jim McMahon, who was playing for the Chicago Bears, he got sacked. Actually, he didn't get sacked. It was after the play was over. Some guy came up and threw him down on the ground. And I was just like, no, Jimmy. And it turned out this guy had a hit list of quarterbacks he wanted to take out. So do you have a hit list? So we can have a number of these questions that we're going to ask. Now, some of these questions you might find a lot of variability in, right? So there are going to be some people who are like, heck yes, I'd kill that mouse. Or, no, how horrible. Or maybe like, I don't really know. I'm sort of like, kind of want to, but whoa. So there could be a lot of variability on questions like that. And on questions like, have you ever wanted to murder someone? Maybe I'm projecting here a little bit. But I would guess that almost everyone would say yes. I guess that almost everyone would say yes.
Just one person.
Just one person. That one person in high school that was just like, oh. You're like, man, I wish you would die. Or when I was a kid, like, Mom, I wish you were dead. You guys never said that to your mom?
No.
None of you?
Sorry.
I would regret that most. I wouldn't want that.
No, we were big jumpers, stompers. I wish I was dead. I wish you were dead. I need another whack to my bottom, huh? Maybe. Anyway, I would have predicted that you'd see a lot of people saying yes, and that maybe I'm wrong. That's fine. I don't really know. This is why I do the study in the first place, right? Because I don't know what the results are going to be. But maybe something like, do you have a hit list? Or do you carry around a book? Maybe not, we're going to say a little black book, but do you carry a list of people that you really dislike around? I'm going to guess that not many people have a book. I mean, there's Facebook, and you may have said, like, we can't stand this person. Oh, this person's, But that's not really a list of just people that you want to...
No, your book or
Yeah.
something.
So anyway, you're going to have some questions that have a lot of variability, and you're going to have some questions that have very little variability at all. And which types of questions are going to be more meaningful when you're trying to analyze data? Ones with lots of variability, or ones with almost no variability?
The least amount.
The least amount of variability. So let's say we have the question, and you guys are my murderers, and you guys are not my murderers. And I pose the question, do you have a list of people that you wanted to kill? And everyone tells me no. There's no variability. No. I just keep it in my head. Can you analyze that? Is there a difference? I mean, if everyone is the same on some measure, then you can't find a difference between the groups. Is there a difference in how humans perform versus human? No, they're all human. So we're not going to find a difference. We could look at different types of humans. Are you male, female, intersex? Black, white, something else? We can look at that because there's variations that we can analyze. But if everything's a constant, we can't really analyze it. We could uncover constants, but we're not really going to be able to analyze them and learn about relationships. So variability is good. So maybe we take our initial survey, we come up with 20 questions that we think are going to be good, and we just give them around to friends. We're not actually doing the real study at that point. We just want to get a sense for our survey. And we find out that some of our questions, everyone's answering the same way. And we can get rid of them, right? So we are in the process of creating the test. We're actually going and collecting some data and maybe analyzing those data to inform how we go and create that test that we're ultimately going to use. So the scientific method is really very fluid. People jump around. They go from interpreting results to saying WTF and jumping back up to identifying a question and an explanation. And maybe what they communicate is not a single experiment, but a number of experiments all related to one topic. It's very common. So don't think of this as a have to go in this order. Much more flexible. In order to get through it, you've got to come down to the communication. Otherwise, you miss out on one of the most important aspects of scientific research, which is that it builds upon itself. So let's take a look quickly at the different types of explanations that we can create. So we've got hypotheses, theories, and law, or I guess hypothesis, singular there. So what are the difference between those things? And I'm expecting you guys to get it wrong, so don't be upset when I say no.
A hypothesis is an educated guess. A theory is something that has more standing, and a law is something you can't prove false, so everyone accepts it.
No. I told you. So the way that she is conceiving of these is a way that they're commonly perceived. A hypothesis. Last class I talked a little bit about an idea versus a hypothesis, right? And the hypothesis is a testable idea. These other things are also ideas. Did you mention educated guess here? Okay, so she said it's an educated guess. And in some sense, a hypothesis can be an educated guess. It's an explanation, but most of our explanations that we come up with aren't like really crazy ones, like there are little fairies that exist in some parallel dimension that are frosting flowers. Right? I mean, I've been educated, I've watched Disney, I've seen Frost, but I'm not coming up with that one because it doesn't seem that reasonable. So I might throw out some potential guesses, ideas, in favor of others, but the crucial part about the hypothesis and these other things is that they are testable. All of these are testable. And it's not that you have a hypothesis, which is just this initial idea, that an initial testable explanation, that when you support it more and more, gets upgraded to a theory. That when you upgrade it more and more, will get upgraded to a law. That's not the way it works. Darwin's theory of evolution, it's a theory. It will never become a law. It's not a hypothesis. It's very different from a hypothesis. These things differ in terms of their scope. So scope refers to how much data they attempt to explain. They also differ in the precision of their explanations. Can any of you guys think of psychological laws? Some people, when they're like, whoa, there's a psychological law? Wow. So there's this law, it's called the YerkesDodson Law. It's one of my favorite psychological laws. Does anyone know what it is?
I was going to say social reciprocity.
Social reciprocity. Okay, what's the law?
Like we normally say, if you're like walking the hallway, you say hi to someone, they say hi back, and that's about it. But if you normally like say, hey, how's it going, what's up, and you have like a full length conversation, you guys are normally going to be around the same level of giving back and forth.
Okay, I was thinking more along the lines of like reciprocal altruism, like you do something for me, I do something for you. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, right? So the YerkesDodson Law is this law that predicts that people's performance on some task changes with how aroused they are. Now, this is not sexual arousal. This is just like, think alertness. So, we have pass. I'm going to spell it like my son did in his, he also writes books and stuff. So pass out is how he wrote something this weekend. So you're passed out on one end versus like you're crazy. Sorry, I know I'm a psychology instructor and I shouldn't use crazy, but go with me. Crazy, crazy excited. Good. I'm just gonna. You guys probably all get that, right? GDG. Good to go. Performance. Rocking. Sucking. So, what happens if you come in to do to take an exam and you're like passed out, or you're just about passed out. You're gonna suck. So what do? It's a long night last night, and today I am drinking the substance. Coffee, caffeine, increases arousal, increases alertness. So as I drink some coffee, what happens? I become more good to go. What happens to my performance? It goes up. Does it keep going up? What happens? No, it doesn't keep going up. At some point, it plateaus. Is that right? No. I said I draw things on the board that aren't. Yeah. At some point, it takes a dump. So think about it. You're taking an exam, and you're like nearly passed out. Ugh, can't focus. Performance stinks. Okay, I'm a little bit more alert. You're in that zone where you're just alert enough, right? Maybe a little anxious because that will give you a little boost, help you focus, all that good stuff. So you're doing pretty well on the exam. But a lot of students have problems on exams. Why? You get over anxious. Test anxiety, right? That's when their arousal is past that good go point. Oh, gee, if I don't pass this test, all this stuff is going to happen. What am I going to do? Or maybe you're in like special forces training. Have any of you guys watched special forces training video on how to be, I forget what it's called, like situational awareness? And like paying attention to the details, and you have very little time. And as you look at something, you've got the drill instructor going, you piece of crap, I'm going to do this and that to your hole in your neck when I kill you, and blah, blah, blah. Nothing. So they're doing this, and how aroused do you get? You're really aroused. And what happens to your performance? Ugh. Think about going up and, well, maybe this is just my dad. Projecting here. So I remember my dad and myself too, when I'm working on a project at home, I'm trying to put together a bike and it's just not working right. And then my kid comes up, Dad, when's it going to be done? And my performance as a father drops. Instead of being like, oh son, it will be finished as soon as I can. Yeah, leave me alone! I'm going to get it done when it gets done, right? So the performance is dropping. So the law, it makes a prediction about a very limited set of things. Performance, arousal, and it makes a very specific type of prediction about the direction of that relationship, or the directions. A hypothesis is similar in scope. So it's about a limited set of data. It may or may not be based on a lot of existing research. A new hypothesis is one that's more like an educated guess, but as the data come in, it becomes a well-supported hypothesis if it doesn't get refuted. A theory, on the other hand, is much broader in scope. It can encompass a number of hypotheses. So things like levels of processing theory. It's a theory that explains as you process things more deeply, and more deeply can be a whole bunch of different types more deeply. As you think about meaning, that's more deep than thinking about sound. As you think about sound, that's more deep than thinking about whether it has a certain letter in it. So it explains a lot of different phenomena. Excuse me. Oh, good grief. Nerve hurt.